Welcome to Starting Nowhere. I'm your host, Brandon. Make sure that you like and subscribe so you can see more Starting Nowhere and be notified when I drop new episodes. Today, my guest is Dr. Panta Rouhani Schaffer. Dr. Rouhani Schaffer is both a medical doctor as well as a PhD in epidemiology. Today, we will talk about how it's been dealing with the COVID-19 outbreak as a medical professional, a mother, and a resident in New York. Lastly, we discuss a presentation that she gave about how race is only skin deep. Please enjoy today's episode. So welcome, Dr. Panta Rouhani Schaffer. How are you doing today, ma'am?
Doing great. How are you?
I'm living the dream, just enjoying this fine Miami weather where it feels like Chicago right now. Because you went to school here in Miami for a while, so you know what the wind gets like here in Brickell.
Yeah, no, it can be pretty intense. Sort of surprising, I think, to some people.
Very surprising to me because you hear about Miami and all the shows and everything you've ever seen. It's all about tropical weather, it's super hot and all that stuff. And it is so cold because the wind here is just whipping it all the time. Now, it's great in the summer, but right now, when it's a little bit cooler, it's not so enjoyable.
Yeah, and I think because it's unexpected, it feels that much colder. It, it's a sort of a mismatch for everyone.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, how has it been for you this year in New York? Because I know New York is obviously the pinnacle of the United States, if not the world, but this year it's maybe felt a little bit different.
Yeah, absolutely different. I mean, having been here during sort of the height of through the whole time of COVID, like really when it was first recognized in the US, and then having people reach out to me that I haven't spoken to in decades because they were just concerned. Um, I mean, it was scary because I think we understood so little about COVID that even for sort of New Yorkers and even for someone like me in sort of science in medicine, it was just constantly evolving. We're still learning day by day, but there was a few weeks where all the things that we thought would never happen, as far as like a shutdown, had happened, and you were stuck inside. So people weren't going outside, and I think if any time people had felt jealous of me living in New York, like they did not feel it when it was in the spring. I think we had a huge exodus of people who left the city, whom I think were probably always in the back of their minds thinking about the suburbs or thinking about relocating, and this was sort of what pushed them over the edge. Um, the saying I always say to my friends is, I don't live in my apartment, I live in the city. But
Mhm.
during the pandemic, I'm living in my apartment, and that's really tough.
Yeah, I've heard that from quite a few people who live in New York, and really not just New York. Any of the more expensive cost of living areas. You've seen a pretty good exodus from LA, San Francisco, and a lot of
Yeah,
those companies. And what's really
yeah.
going to be interesting now is Silicon Valley has started to push for more remote work, and they're wondering what that's going to do for the competitiveness of those positions, because now they're going to expand, because now you potentially open it up to the United States to start with, but then you may open it up to the rest of the world as well. So you're not alone in experiencing the big city in the time of COVID. And just one point of clarification, because I want to say this with you on, so that way you can correct me where I'm wrong, and I'm often
Sure.
wrong. But you are both a medical doctor and an epidemiologist, correct?
Correct.
Okay,
Yeah. So
MD,
sometimes I
PhD.
an MD PhD, and then I also have a master's of public health. So I sometimes will say physician scientist to make the point that I do have two sort of different mindsets, and um, that sometimes shapes the way that I see things. So I think for some of my friends that are physicians, I think as a PhD, we think about things differently. My PhD happens to be in epidemiology, and my master's of public health is also in epidemiology and biostatistics. So it's an interesting sort of interdisciplinary viewpoint to have, especially this year of all years. One of the many sort of, I try to focus on like the good things or maybe silver linings, because you've got to hope that some good comes out of this year. But for me, one of those things is I think for the longest time I had family and friends who didn't understand what epidemiology is. And so they've learned now. So it's become one of the probably unexpected new vocabulary terms for 2020, where a lot of people who otherwise, why would they know what an epidemiologist is or what epidemiology sort of encompasses. This is the year that I think you've heard that word as an occupation over and over and over again.
So I can say that I got to experience that on the last first date I had, where I didn't know what epidemiology was, and somebody got to teach me that, and I'm sure she was just thrilled to do that. And here we are 4 years later, and she's still teaching me. So
Yeah, no, because I think, for us, so epidemiology is really like the core science of public health. And it's such a large, sort of encompassing specialty, if you will, because you're studying sort of the determinations of what contributes to health and illness in communities. And so it can be study design, it can be sort of pandemic, epidemic sort of work, looking at rates, whether that's the incidence or the prevalence, like these things changing. So even for some physicians, I think when I describe epidemiology, I think sometimes you don't realize how broad of a topic it can be when you're talking about like the science of public health.
absolutely. And I think, again, let me start from here. I'm a layperson when it comes to medicine. I just have my very general views of things. But the way that I've always looked at it is when you're a physician, you generally speaking are dealing with a one on one kind of basis. When you're in epidemiology, you're dealing with giant populations. Well, I shouldn't say giant because that's very relative, but
No,
nonetheless,
but
you're
yeah,
dealing with big populations.
yeah, that's a big distinction to make. I think public health, you're trying to decipher what may be playing a role in a disease process or what may be advantageous as far as like prevention of a certain disease, and you're hoping to make policy changes or behavioral changes on large scale. And in medicine, we really sort of deal with one-on-one, right? So for the most part, we're helping one patient at a time, and so that can be one thing that sort of separates the two out, is sort of the impact that you may have. And one thing that I missed when I sort of did more public health work was that intimacy that you get with one person being your patient. You get to know them, and there's a story, and there's a context, and you can know that person as a person and not just as a patient. So that's sort of the beauty for me of being able to sort of care for people on a one-on-one basis, and then as sort of like a larger group.
Yeah, I think it has a lot of applicability to both. But one of the things I did want to kind of talk to you about tonight as well is how do you go from translating what you've seen in the large group, and you have the different factors that maybe let you think of something, but then you go into that one-on-one situation and you can't go in there with too many assumed conditions or assumed symptoms you're looking for, any of that type of stuff based upon the group that person may belong to. So how do you keep those two things in mind where you know what the data says, but at the same time you're looking at an individual?
Yeah, so I mean, you have to be able to sort of take out any bias that you may have, sort of reduce the bias you may have about the characteristics of a group, because that individual may not identify with the group, or it can be, different than the group. So I think often we've talked about in medicine, we talk about sort of um, from from bench, to bedside. So that means like from a scientific laboratory bench, what sort of innovation, what sort of discoveries can be made, and how you take that and make it applicable to caring for a patient by the bedside. And I've always sort of proposed, like for those of us who are MD PhD with PhDs in sort of population based or translational sort of disciplines like epidemiology, it's almost like looking at the full population, trying to take away from it different characteristics of what we see, and then bringing it back to the patient. So I think it's this like bi-directional, like from one person to the group, from the big group back to the person, and just trying to find a way to bridge that gap that sometimes may exist. Um, yeah, it's never a good idea. I think the same thing when I'm on faculty at NYU and when I teach the residents. I say, you learn about certain maybe risk factors or characteristics of disease processes being of higher frequency in certain groups, but you're going to meet people who don't fit into those groups. So if a person doesn't fit into that group, like it is very possible that they still have the process. So, for example, I'm a dermatologist clinically, and so rosacea is something that's very common. People know of it, they've heard of it, they may have some images of what they think a patient with rosacea looks like. I think most of the time people see only sort of fair skinned patients, like those who, may be sort of more European background, and won't necessarily think of rosacea as a possibility for a patient who might be darker pigmented and comes in and has, all of the characteristics that we see of rosacea, and they're sort of eliminating rosacea as a possibility just because the patient's sort of ethnic background doesn't fit with like what they have learned to be the population most affected by rosacea. So it's being able to just sort of think and not just learn and measure things by algorithms.
Gotcha. And that makes a lot of sense to me because I think whenever we're looking at large swaths of data that way, it doesn't necessarily apply on a one-on-one basis for every single individual, as you're kind of saying. It applies in a kind of a general sense to give you some clues of where to look and those type of things as well. Because I think about it the same way with, you say, business data, right? There's a certain marketing strategy that is prevalent in the marketplace and everything, but it doesn't mean it's going to work for your business. You know what I mean? If you have an
Yeah,
online business, you
absolutely.
may not be able to market like a brick and mortar, even though it says for all these hundreds of years we have history and all this stuff, this is the way you do it, you know? So I think a lot of that application crosses over multiple disciplines, both in medicine and also business and anything else we do. And as we've learned this year, politics and information distribution in general. So,
No, absolutely. This is the year that I think this is the year I've learned so much um, about media. And I think about sort of the dissemination of information and like pertinent information, information that would be helpful for people to make choices. And that has just been eye opening for me. So I've been fortunate to sort of play my public health role during the earlier part of the pandemic. And I think there was some information that I was able to see or read about, and just seeing the delay of it actually getting out to the public was a
mhm,
few weeks. And I think that maybe historically that seems fast. I just, to me, in today's world of sort of being interconnected and having all these media platforms and the ability to get to people, thought that things would have happened sooner. So for example, like mask wearing,
mhm.
we didn't start wearing masks in New York City, right? So we were like the hot spot of the whole world, and mask wearing didn't get implemented until um, about April like 19th to 13th, as far as sort of mandating it. Um, so that was a delay. I mean, given that really people started closing their businesses down in mid March, so to have a
Mhm.
couple weeks where that behavioral change could have really made an impact in decreasing cases, um, kind of unbelievable to me that that things weren't happening a little bit faster as far as behavior.
Well, do you think that's something we're going to see kind of change as we go forward? I think, and again, maybe I am just naive this way, but I
Yeah.
think a lot of times information dissemination is slowed down purposely to make sure that it's accurate, so that way when they do disseminate information, they get it a little bit more right. But what we've become accustomed to in this day and age, with a 24-hour news cycle and everything else we have, is fast information with about 70% accuracy. You know what I mean? And I think that there were some agencies in the midst of this pandemic that they just weren't prepared for, that were concerned about that. And then, well, I don't want to step on that. We'll get to that after this. But basically, do you think
Yeah,
that we're
we're
going to
going
have
into
to?
a different territory here.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I've got another thing I wanted to mention on that, from that perspective. But I guess the question for me is: do you believe, or let me say it this way, because this is how I feel about it. I'm not placing this on you, but do you trust people enough to take half information that hasn't been completely vetted and run with that and be good enough with it? Or has this process that you've seen happen this year make you feel like, no, we need to really have our ducks in a row before we tell people anything?
So a couple things. So one thought that I had while you were sort of speaking before you posed the question
Hmm.
was, with a lot of things, for example, in medicine in particular, we do sort of risk analyses, and probably in business as well, right? So there's sort of
Oh
a
yeah.
risk benefit, and so wearing a mask, for example, like you didn't really have to wait for that data to come out. Like even if you were totally wrong, like the worst case scenario was that the person wore a mask. So it injures no one, it costs very little, and maybe we would have like decreased sort of at source like transmission of droplets, and then we learned aerosolization of like the virus.
Hmm.
So as far as like information being vetted, I mean, sadly, I think the thing that played a role from for public health agencies is, and this was really sort of troubling to me, was when I think of public health, I think of it as being politically neutral. I think of it
Hmm.
being the health of the public, that we put that forward, and that we don't really have any loyalty, allegiance to any party, because it really doesn't matter to me. That the health of the entire public is what's important to me. So I think that some of the government agencies, my belief is maybe we're not able to convey the information that they wanted to. So
Mhm.
whether that was tactics to sort of decrease fear, pandemonium, the public, feeling like it was the end of the world or some type of Armageddon. I'm sure there's probably some things that, people much smarter than me understand about not causing a rise. But vetting sources, I've also learned this year that people don't do their own due diligence. Like, I don't know that you would need to in the realm of like science and public health, but for a lot of other sort of political aspects, I've been sort of surprised that sometimes people aren't reading multiple sources and then coming to a consensus, or sort of, accepting something that they feel that they've really studied. So I think it's just poor
Mhm.
practice in medicine, and probably poor practice in personal life also, to just read one source, to accept it at face value. And there's no sort of analysis of like a hierarchy of evidence, which is what we do again in medicine. So we look at journal articles. So study design determines, is this a good study? Was it just one case? How many people were involved? What did the people who were involved look like? Is this representative of our society? What was the situation? Couldn't we apply this to our communities? Um, Versus, just reading one source and hanging your hat on it and being like, yeah, I read this and that's it. And just because you read it doesn't mean it's been verified or vetted. But I, I'm hoping that things will change. I think because people are, if they haven't already been tired, people are really tired now of this situation and really want to know when it's going to end, and when we can sort of hope to have some semblance back of like normal.
Absolutely. And I think that what is going to be challenging, both from a political, a public health, just pure societal perspective, is how we deal with and I'm going to say some buzzwords here that have been said a million times this year, so prepare yourself. But deal with the
Epidemiology.
cognitive dissonance.
Just
Yeah,
kidding.
yeah, exactly. The
Yeah.
the cognitive dissonance, the confirmation bias, and the echo chambers that the internet has created for these people. So where it's not about the accuracy of, excuse me, the accuracy of the information. It's the information that I already believe, saying what I already believe. And
Yeah,
that's
it's similar. It's exactly that. So sorry to cut you off. It's like, my
yeah,
son is learning how to write essays and sort of the algorithm of essays. And if you're going to make a claim, to have evidence that backs it up. And so sometimes when he's writing the essay, he's coming up with a claim and then he has to sort of back it up with some type of evidence. And so that sort of echo chamber is, in my mind, I have a thought about what I think about this topic, and I'm going to find the
mhm,
source that backs up my thought. And
yeah.
like, is that the right thing to do? No, right? So where is the actual objective truth? And like, how do you find it? And how do you know? And the thing is, it's probably not just one source of information. It's probably that you have to survey multiple sources of information, and where there is overlap is probably where the truth is lying.
Yeah. And the disheartening thing is, I just simply don't think that people either have the time or the patience, or let's
Yeah,
say the will to do that, because you're basically talking
it's a lot
about,
of
like I
work.
said, it is, and I think for me, that's the first thing I do. I think I call Facebook now my pre-Google, and what that means for me is that a lot of times when I go on Facebook and I see somebody post something, that just tells me what to Google because I'm like, I
Yeah.
don't know whether or not what you've posted is true, but let me look into that a little bit more. And you've been my kind of catalyst for going in and looking into that. But I don't think a lot of people do that. They say, like you said, they see it and they go, "That's the thing I already thought, so that's good. I'm good with that news source." What does that say? It's babylonb.org. Okay, cool. We're good with that.
Yeah. I think, um, that's to do otherwise, I think requires a certain amount of sort of insight,
Mhm.
introspection, maybe, emotional, not only intelligence, but maturity, because you're sort of questioning yourself. You're sort of saying, okay, this is what I think. Am I right? Am I wrong? Like, what am I missing? So for you to sort of have the wherewithal to say, well, I'm going to like test this out and see if there's other sources that conflict it, and where is the difference and where is like the debate.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, and I have not watched yet the documentary Social Dilemma. I've heard a lot about it. I know that it has, created a lot of thought for people, that maybe even we're sort of also only going to we're going to be exposed, for example, on Facebook,
Hmm.
um, based on sort of who our friends are, what they post, whose information we see. And so it's just like being narrowed down further and further and further.
Hmm.
Um, Instead of really it being an opportunity to see lots of different viewpoints and saying, like, wow, I've never really thought about that. And that's a different way to look at things. And I don't know if I agree with it, but it's got me thinking.
Well, and I think the problem that a lot of people have, and let me say it this way, actually, I shouldn't say problem. One of the challenges that a lot of people go through is that when they do have people who have disagreeing point of views is one, how to deal with that in a cordial manner, but then also can they keep that on their timeline and keep looking at that and feel okay. I think a lot of people remove people from their timelines that have differing opinions, and that causes part of the problem because now you're not seeing what the other side is saying, you're not seeing what other people are out there believing, so that you know where this information is coming from. And again, here's the thing that's a scary thing to say, very scary thing to say, but it's true. I think Alex Jones is pretty much insane, right? I think it's a fairly fair statement for a lot of people. However, he's been right. And that's the scary thing to say, is that somebody like Alex Jones or somebody who goes out there and they say these preposterous things sometimes may be right. And then that, for some people, validates everything they're saying. And so that, I think, is sometimes the fear for people who are looking at their timeline and trying to take people out of there. They're worried about when they're going to be right and how they emotionally deal with that. And I don't know that they can continue to have that on their Facebook page or their Twitter or whatever it is. But that's one of the things I always try to challenge myself is to not unfollow people that I don't agree with. I want to keep them on there because I need to see the differing opinions so I don't become so sure of myself that I can just yell at people, across the street or whatever.
And I think that's tough because I'll tell you, I
Hmm.
think you're a better person than me because I've definitely unfriended a ton of people this year. So, like,
Wait. So hold on. Let's stop right there.
yeah.
You are a medical doctor and epidemiologist in the midst of a pandemic. There is no way that I'm a better person than you. Okay, so stop. I don't unfollow people on Facebook. That doesn't give me a Nobel Prize.
But I think for me, I think I guess it's the information I saw people posting, right? So if I felt
Hmm.
like they were posting things that were totally propaganda, and I was like, wow, this person's completely um, going down this route, I, you know, I don't want a part of it.
Hmm.
But again, Facebook for me is not my professional outlet. It's sort of
Yeah.
personal. So um, the friend, I mean, even that, it's a very large sort of understand. It's like big making friend a very broad group, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, so I hear you. So maybe I'll sort of maybe reconsider. Maybe Brandon, you maybe I'll reconsider next time I see something that's really different because I'm saying the opposite of what I just said like 10 minutes ago.
No. No. No.
Um,
No. I don't think so. Here's why I would say that too for somebody like yourself and people who are out there doing the work day in and day out. It's easy for me to say that. When I go to work, I talk about supply chain stuff. That does not like seep into my day to day, right? But you can't get away from this. So I can see how that could be exhausting for somebody like you because you're at it 12 hours a day or whatever it is already. And then you have to come and see somebody on Facebook who thinks that you went to school for all those years and got your degrees and did all this stuff so you could trick them into wearing a mask. I can understand why that would be infuriating
yeah,
for you. So
or
it
yeah,
is
or
very
that
different.
or there's any desire and listen, I wasn't a frontline worker, right? So I
Mhm.
wasn't in the ER and I wasn't in the
Right, right.
ICU, but it viscerally really upsets me to hear a claim that, physicians, this is a ploy to make more money, that the physicians make more money. I mean, we've lost a lot of physicians as we've lost a lot of people.
Mhm.
So it's things like that, that you're just like, there's a line in the sand and you've crossed it and you're out.
Yeah.
So
I I s
that's
I support you
yeah.
protecting your mental health and doing what you feel is best for you.
Yes.
Like, I'm not against that. I don't wanna
Yes.
sound holier than thou and come
Yeah.
off that
No, no,
way,
no,
so
but
no.
that's good. I think it's good. I think it yeah, I think it was more of like a, strategic way to keep my, mental health intact.
Absolutely. But one of the things I always go back to, and the social dilemma confirms this, but here's the only problem I have with the social dilemma is that as people, we tend to seek a silver bullet. 5-minute abs. We want the one superfood that
Fast.
we have to eat that'll save us and everything like that, right? We want a simple solution to a grand problem. And that's exactly what we're talking about when it comes to this information, because what is at the root of it, and I'm not an anti capitalist by any means, is capitalism. Because Humans like sensationalism. Reality TV has proven that. Reality TV doesn't exist if it didn't like
Yes.
sensationalism. So
Yes.
then what do you want from your news source? What is going to make me watch, which is the incentive for the news source to keep going because that's how they make their money? Well, sensationalism. So CNN does it. Well, Fox News does it. So if
Yeah.
I turn off Facebook, if I turn off social media, how am I getting my news? I have to get news some way, right? Well, my local news isn't better. None of these sources are better. And so with that at the root of it, I see how Facebook and Twitter and those type of sources can spread it much quicker because anybody can post anything on the internet, and once it gets going, it's impossible to stop. But I would just say that I don't know that the solution is going back to the other media sources because, again, at their heart, they have to make money, and that's always going to come first before. Well, I shouldn't say for everybody, but for a lot of people, for the integrity of what you're doing.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And listen, what I'm saying is, I like reading sort of textbook, nonfiction, dry, objective,
Yes.
data. And so that's not exciting for the vast majority of people, right? So they don't, there should be a story. And you're right, that's sort of what grabs your attention. They're
Hmm.
doing like the commercial even for like 60 minutes. I mean, they're not going to be like, here's the timeline of COVID spread through the world. Like, no one's gonna want to watch that.
Yeah.
Like, so it's got to be something that's gonna make you want to, like, oh, I don't want to miss this. I'm gonna sit through the commercials and like wait for this to come back on. So yeah, that's what I've learned this year. I think I had a I think I just think I'd never thought about it before.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of things that we never thought about before this year came upon us in the way that it did. I think there's a lot of stuff that a lot of people were forced to face, and in a lot of ways, that's good. Because here's the thing I'll say about this: COVID-19 is a deadly virus. However, it is not the most deadly virus. So if we're going to have a worldwide pandemic where we screw up as much as we have, thank God it's this one, right? That's what I'm
Yeah,
saying.
exactly. That's where we're all at. We're sort of like trying to make it like half glass full, like just to sort of look at like the, I don't know, silver linings, the things that we can learn from it, the practices that we had in place before that seem absolutely insane.
Hmm.
Um, so, just the proximity of people to each other, for example, on the subway in New York, or like crowded restaurants, or that maybe staff like in a kitchen didn't necessarily wear masks. I mean, now it seems crazy.
Hmm. Well, I don't think seems that crazy because I'm in Miami, which after New York became the new world leader hotspot for
Yes.
COVID. So we both
Yes.
lived in places where people, both because of the proximity and because of their desires, weren't doing what they needed to do. So, which brings me to a question that I wanted to ask you your opinion on, and I apologize if I'm misinformed on this, but actually I don't,
Tell
because
me.
if I'm misinformed, you can correct me, and then everybody else gets it too, because I think there's a lot of people who think what I'm about to say. So Dr. Fauci, I believe I saw him say this, came out after, and because he originally said people don't need to wear masks, then came out later
Right.
and said basically that that was a policy choice so that first line responders and protectors and everything like that, and the healthcare workers could get the PPE they need, and there was a worry about that selling out. What do you think of that choice and the way that that was presented at that time, and how that, and what does that do for the mistrust, I guess, of the medical community?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think it even caused a lot of physicians to sort of question the CDC. And this is what I'm going to say because I don't know the truth, and I don't know that any of us will ever find out the truth. So the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention is a government agency. It is sort of part of the federal government, and so you can't just put out statements without having sort of White House, um, you know, examination of the policy that you're going to put out or the information that you're going to disseminate.
Hmm.
So, was that a decision that was strictly left to the CDC? We'll never know. Was that sort of interference from the White House? I don't know. Um, there was a New York Times article that was the first to suggest, and then Dr. Fauci confirmed that there was a concern that we had limited personal protective equipment, and that they were concerned that people would go out and sort of in a hoarding mentality take all of the supplies, and then the people who needed it most wouldn't get it. Um, so yeah, I don't know if we'll ever find out what actually happened, if it was a decision made at the CDC level, or if there was essentially a higher force that sort of said, nope, we're not going to say anything about masks, or we're going to say it's not necessary, or um, it's not needed. but it made I mean, that's what happens is it creates distrust, right? So then
Mhm.
anything after the fact just seems delayed, and you sort of lose the trust of the scientific community. That's not good, and then obviously of the public, that's even worse.
Yeah. I will say that maybe surprisingly, I take somewhat of a different point of view in the sense that I think anybody who leads a large enough group of people has to lie to their people at times. What you have to hope is that that person is doing it for the right reasons. I think that this thing we've gotten ourselves into, and maybe it's always been this way, and I just haven't paid attention, but this thing that Americans have seemed to want the 100% truth all the time. No, the country's too big. The things that we're working on are too deep, and all this stuff for that to be the policy that's going to work. If you give people 100% of the truth 100% of the time, it causes a lot of problems. And I think that there's a lot of things that the government has always done that has mismanaged that. And so what I say is this is why you have to have the system that balances itself. You have politicians who lie, you have the journalists who try to catch them in their lies, and you have everybody else in between that's kind of in the system. And so that's what happens is they're going to lie when they think it's the right thing to do, and you just hope you put the right liar in place, really, because all leaders lie. Period. You have to
Yeah,
if you're
and I think so the thing is, did really, like, actual public health officials make that decision? And I wouldn't be
Mhm,
surprised, because there is a difference between public health and medicine, in that public health has policy that's with it.
mhm,
Medicine is a bit more sort of objective and dry,
yeah.
in that there's sort of less interpretation, and public health is applied. It's sort of, applied science. And, and in those early days, and I don't know if other people throughout the country felt this, but if someone was seen out and about, there was a known shortage of specifically N95s and then of surgical masks. And so if someone was seen out and about who had an N95 or had a surgical mask, there were a lot of people who would get angry at them and would sort of mask shame them into, like,
Mhm.
why are you wearing that? Like, our healthcare workers need it. And so I think it's unfortunate that we didn't plan. We knew this wasn't the surprise. There was ample time to sort of get supplies in place and take action and inform people about what to do. Do I think that if we had told the public, hey, yes, you should wear a mask, please reserve the N95s and the surgical masks for healthcare workers? I
Mhm.
think there's some parts of the country that would have abided by that, and there's other parts of the country that would have been like, each man for himself. Like, if that's the better mask, I'm going to wear it.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think again, I don't know if we'll ever find out who was the real sort of decision, where that decision tree was to make that announcement.
I'm going with I'm gonna blame my mother. So she could get her math making business off the ground. I think that she did all of this. I think it's all her ploy to get her sales going up. That's what I'm going with. So
That is the best conspiracy theory I have heard all year. Like,
I think so because now, well, see, that's what's scary though. This is a legitimate fear that I just had in my mind. I wanted you. Obviously, I'm joking, but if this plays in the wrong circles, now there's some woman in Georgia who people are convinced is behind the whole conspiracy, and they could build a case for that because that's how these things work. It's that outlandish that they go that way, and that's terrifying but hilarious at the same time. And well,
yeah,
I
because
shouldn't say
I
that. My
think
mom will kill me.
no, but I think that I think when you have um, all of these different sources of information and it's so heated, and we've had not just COVID, I mean, so much has happened this year that there's all this room for you to be like, well, I don't know if I believe that, but well, that sounds crazy, but I'm going to go with that. So there's room to make all these alternative sort of hypotheses.
Yeah. And what my one of my favorite things that's coming out now is for the past say, I don't know, 5 to 10 years. I'm not really sure the timeline. We've been just crapping on Jenny McCarthy. We've been crapping on all these anti-vaxxers and all this stuff. And guess what? There's a COVID-19 vaccine right around the corner. And what is everyone talking about? Everyone is turning into anti vaxxers. It's the craziest thing to me that the people who have been ridiculed for so long for not believing in science, and we believe in science over here and everything. Look, the measles and mumps outbreaks are happening all over the place and stuff. And now everybody's an anti vaxxer. It's crazy. You become what you hate.
Yeah, I mean, I think, for the vaccine to really be successful, not only does the vaccine itself have to be effective
Mhm.
and have efficacy, but enough people have to get vaccinated in order for it to like really work. So that sort of that second part is going to be tricky. I think when they have done surveys, and again, my source is going to be just like the news.
Mhm.
Those numbers haven't been that high. I mean, I think the last I heard was the number has sort of been around 60% of the population says that they would consider it.
And that's
Yeah.
I I understand where that I want to be clear about this. I understand where that mistrust comes from because of everything else
I
that we've had
do. I
going on this
understand
year.
it. I totally understand it. I think I've had a lot of patients and friends say to me, you know, are you going to be first in line just because you are in medicine? And I have no idea. I imagine that the rollout will include sort of more essential, you know, very frontline, right? So our like EMTs and ER staff and ICU and the people who are really going to be um, as frontline as you can possibly get. But
Mhm.
I think when you create all of this sort of chaos, there's in that a lot of mistrust. And then, do you really want? I've heard these exact words be said by a lot of people: a sort of um, bootlegged, um, you know, fast tracked vaccine. You know, so I think it doesn't feel good if you hear that normally vaccines take multiple years and we're trying to do it as fast as possible to a virus we don't fully understand.
Mhm. Well, and I think again, you're the person who knows this, so correct me anywhere that I'm wrong. I am fully aware that I'm going to be wrong at points in this, but I do think what you can also see is how effective medical research could be if it was given the proper funding and focus. That's one of the things that comes out
Absolutely.
of this.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the problems that we had is, you know, the pandemic task force had been dissolved. And so even at the CDC, there was no task force, right? It always existed. And I think the feeling was that where's the pandemic? Why do we have to have a task force unless there is a pandemic? Well, because you have it in place, you know, for emergency situations such as a
Mhm.
pandemic. Um, yeah, so I mean, this has just been one of these years. I was talking with colleagues earlier today, and we were saying, you know, do we think we're going to learn from this? I mean, whenever this ends, right? So we're in the middle of it. No one knows what the end of this is going to be. Um, but let's say that, like, we go back to the way things were, and we're supposed to have another pandemic, you know, in another like 100 years. Will
Mhm.
we have learned anything? I'm not sure. You know, I don't
Mm.
know. I don't know. It's like maybe it's so far removed that people will start to feel comfortable again and go back to practicing things the way that they did. And, you know, will seem like it's never going to happen.
Yeah. Give me 1 second. I'm gonna take my hat off. It's getting hot.
Yeah.
Okay. So one of the things that I've been kind of comparing it to, because you've lived in Florida as well, is how Floridians deal with hurricanes.
Yes.
Every hurricane that they're alive for that misses emboldens them to how they react to future hurricanes. So
Hmm.
I am concerned that that's what we could see from this pandemic because people feel so viscerally about the shutdowns and about everything else that's gone on and the economic factors of it, um, that they look at the next pandemic with such disregard. And so now the next one, which is again a more deadly disease or virus or whatever it um, is able to take hold a lot more because people do not react until it's an emergency a lot of times. So I'm hopeful that we learn from this, and I'm hopeful that our government officials, when they're not out politicizing everything, take the proper precautions and set things in place going forward. But I'm with you. I don't know what that looks like. I'm cautiously optimistic, which is a good term for a lot of the things that I've seen this year.
Yeah. I mean, I think people's, if in our lifetime we should face another pandemic, I think the way that people react may also be shaped by how they were personally affected. So I
Mm,
think if the person has felt a lot of loss, whether their business or a loved one or um, you know their job, any of those sorts of things, they might sort of have a different response than the person who happened to be, you know, the subgroup of people who were asymptomatic and fared okay and never really knew anyone that was massively affected by COVID. So sometimes that impacts you, right? So like the person who's home didn't have the shutters and like everything got turned upside down versus the
Mhm.
one who's like, yeah, I don't know. I took all this precaution and I don't know that I need to again.
Absolutely. I think the thing that I've seen happen, and I just because I want to be petty, I'm not traditionally petty outwardly. I'm definitely petty in my mind, but a lot of people have been talking a lot of crap because one of the risk factors for COVID is obesity, being overweight, and things like that, right? So I'm hoping, just because I'm super petty, that the next pandemic attacks people with six packs. I apologize to John in
I
advance because
mean,
John's not going to
yeah,
make it if
it
that's the
can
case.
totally
But
happen, right? I think those people who work out every day, it takes them down first.
yeah, and especially if they have really evil vaudevillian facial hair right now, that'd probably take them too.
Yeah.
Mm,
Well, that was a big thing during the other thing that was interesting has nothing to do with medicine, what
mhm.
people were doing, during the shutdown. So, that I found very fascinating and in a lot of ways sort of, like, reassuring. So people,
Mhm.
who had day pajamas and night pajamas, I was like, "Cool, it's not just me." And then, a lot of people were growing out beards. So almost every picture we saw, like of men and some women growing out beards, and baking, um, you know, just trying to find ways to fill the time.
Mhm. I think that that's the cool thing that I've seen as well, because I love people who try things. I don't care if you're good at it. I don't care if what you're trying is stupid or whatever else, because it may not be stupid to you. Try things. Like what I'm doing right now, talking in this podcast that no one's going to watch, is in itself stupid, but it's enjoyable. And I think without the pandemic, a lot of us wouldn't get to try those things. And I celebrate people who try anything, whether it's going to be good or not. Again, it's really hard to say these things because a lot of people have lost their jobs, they've lost loved ones, they've lost maybe a family member or something like that. But there's a lot of positive things that have come out of the pandemic for some people, and I do hope that we're able to catch that momentum and go with it, because sometimes, let's take a deployment for example. A lot of people, when they deploy in the military, they get in super good shape because there's nothing to do but work out, and then they come back and they don't keep up with it. So I'm hoping that
Right.
that's not what happens here. I'm hoping that people carry those habits and that experimental energy forward so they can keep trying to do those things. And I except especially sourdough. I love sourdough bread. Everybody should make sourdough bread so I can have it.
Yeah. um, I think for us personally, I think we realized how overscheduled we were.
Hmm.
So we were just doing a ton of stuff all the time, extra classes for the kids and like activities and like events. And I remember that first weekend just realizing because of COVID, like a birthday party had gotten canceled and this other class they take got canceled. And all of a sudden, our full weekend was completely clear. And I kind of had this sigh of relief. It was, sort of the calm before the storm. It was really before I knew how bad things were going to be. And I just loved that quiet weekend. It was great. So to me, I'm trying to recreate that and hold on to that. And I think until things come to a screeching halt, sometimes you don't realize like all the things you were doing, how much of it was unnecessary and how much of it you could just sort of, do without.
The the first thing that went for me that I was very thankful for, well, it had a downside to it, but I'll get to that in a second, is I switched to remote when I moved here to Miami before the pandemic started. So I was already working remote, but I had to travel back to Tampa once a month. So when COVID hit, that all got shut down. So I didn't have to travel anymore, and I was 100% remote. Now it was awesome because I don't have to do that driving more. Not so much because I don't get to see your parents any. I was staying with them
Oh,
whenever I would come up and stuff like
yeah.
that. So I got to see them less and less. But uh, now it makes it even more. But it makes it even a bigger event if and when we do get to see them and stuff. So especially for Cobra June when she makes the delicious food. So now I get like three times as much. So again, everything has its ups and downs.
It's like, yeah, you get more food when
Yeah.
you do see each other.
Exactly, exactly. And so the last time we saw them, we did get she was teaching Gazelle, of course, how to make food and everything like that. And so we just thawed out some pheasant June like 2 days ago or whatever. So we still have a little bit in there left over and stuff as well. So I'm all about it.
I know that's the only problem with being so far away. I think she would have to like ship it to us. Like she can't fly here with it. I mean,
Hmm.
I guess you could, but yeah, it would probably go bad by the time you got here. I'm not sure how that
Other
would
than
make it on the plane stuff.
well, if you freeze it, it'd probably be okay.
Yeah,
I
then I have to carry the cooler. I know, yeah, I have to think this out. It's like I should, like, think about this.
if we can plan this out, then I say we launch a business for her because her food is incredible. It's
I
absolutely
know,
incredible.
right? I know, I think so too. I always wonder if she did actually make a business out of it, if, like, the joy of it would be gone. Do you know what I mean? Like, I'm not sure. I don't know.
Uh,
She might like getting the money, so we'll see.
I wanna just see her running her kitchen and just yelling at your dad to go do things for her and him running around doing it. That would
That
bring me
would be
great
awesome.
joy.
Yeah, like one of those cooking shows. Like, I think she would definitely fill the role.
Well, so did she show you the videos, of, she filmed of her actually cooking?
No, 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 not yet.
Oh,
So,
they're
so
great.
I haven't seen them. I'm sure. I'm sure they're like super cute.
A future YouTube star, I'm telling you, she could be a YouTube star tomorrow. TikTok and all that, she would kill on there. Absolutely. So,
She should do that. Yeah, maybe I just need to teach her how to do that.
I would love it. I'll send her all the equipment right now. I'm totally 100% behind this idea. I think it's amazing.
Yeah, I think she would actually like really enjoy that.
Well,
And I think the thing is you have to post it unedited. I'm gonna say that it should probably just be like one of those like you just hit record and whatever
mm.
happens happens. Like just play it the way it happened.
Yeah,
That would be
stream it
good.
live. Let her go
Yeah.
live. She doesn't even need to record it. That'd be great. I'm
Yeah.
super addicted to this idea now, but so one of the things that we kind of touched on a little bit there, but I was very interested in again because I know that say I went to school for business, and online every day I see people who spit out all these business tips and all this stuff, and I'm like, that's not going to work. That's a terrible idea. This is stupid. Don't do that. So, and again, I didn't go to school for that long, nor did I go to particularly those good of schools, right? But for you, having gone to school as long as you did and learning all the things you did, and they were good schools and graduated like top of your class, all this type of stuff, right? How how have you emotionally handled that? We're seeing everybody who didn't go through what you went through to earn what you earned, saying they know better than you, saying that what you're saying is a lie and those type of things. I don't know how you deal with that.
I mean, I think that they're influenced by the context of the world we're living in, right? So like I think I don't fault them. I think that if they feel that way, that's okay. What angers me more isn't the way that they feel, but their behavior. So it's one thing if you
Mhm,
feel that way, but if your behavior is actually impacting someone else's risk, then that's where I get upset, right? So it's one thing if like you don't believe in COVID or you don't think it's as big of a deal or it's a hoax, but the fact that you won't wear a mask, especially in certain situations, you're placing all of your neighbors, at risk. And I say neighbors like loosely, so all the members of your community that maybe you don't recognize, like um, the nice thing about being in Manhattan has been that we have a really high percentage of sort of adherence to mask wearing.
mhm,
And even on the hottest days in the summer, like if I was on the sidewalk by myself and I happened to walk by a bench and I would see someone with their mask down, interestingly, it was fine. I was just walking by, it didn't bother me. But I saw um, a guy who was probably either my age, maybe a tiny bit younger or older, kind of see me and then very quickly pick up his mask. And to me, that's such a tremendous sign of respect and courtesy. So that's where I have more of the issue of okay, if you don't want to believe what I have to say, that's okay, but live in your own world, live in your own bubble, but your practices and your behaviors do impact others.
well, that is the underlying issue of a million and one American problems.
Yeah, I mean every problem, right? So like what you're saying impacts others. Everything, um, everything that you choose to where you dine, what things you purchase, what books you read, all of this kind of stuff, right, will ultimately sort of impact everyone. The thing that bothers me the most is this idea that like you're just this one unit that you just by yourself in isolation. No, you have tremendous impact on others, and that's unbelievable to me.
I'm right there with you. I don't understand how people believe they can get the benefit of society without the kind of social obligation to think about other people. You can't just take all the benefits from it and then just give nothing back to it. You can't be an individual when it's convenient for you, but a member of society when you're getting some kind of positive thing from it. So I always try to think of other people. Sometimes not in the best way. Sometimes I think badly of other people, but nonetheless, you have to
You're
try to
thinking
be
of
a
them.
good. Exactly, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Maybe thinking being less of them. But anyways,
Yeah.
but I am right there with you because I think that if we are more courteous to one another, if we're more considerate, then we don't get these type of things. And interestingly enough, one of the more considerate societies out there, Japan, has had mask wearing as part of its culture for just I don't know how long. And
Yeah.
you're just talking about regular colds and not even like a pandemic. That just if I'm not feeling well, I don't want to make other people sick. Let me wear a mask today.
Yeah, no, having been to Asia a few times, particularly in Japan, um, I mean, I think it's incredibly thoughtful, right? To say, okay, I woke up a little bit under the weather, and just to sort of safeguard others from whatever I might be sort of um, manifesting here, I'm going to wear this mask. So there's no mandate. It was on your own volition. You voluntarily put it on, but you were thinking of others, and that like just it warms my heart because you're thinking of others.
Absolutely. And especially, I mean, not only as a medical professional, but as a mother, I think that's one of the kind of key characteristics you have to carry with you. Because if not, holy crap, I don't want to see your kids in a few years.
Yeah, I mean, we do this where we parent our children with these ideals of like how to be the best citizen and how to be a model citizen, how to be a good member of the community, and to be kind and to be empathetic. And then somewhere there's a disconnect, and then it's like everyone for themselves, you
Hmm.
know. So um, yeah, I mean, I think in some ways that is something that I hope that like I do feel that children of this generations are going to be very different. I mean, their programming is different, their curriculum is different, the parenting is different, and so I think overall, I'm hopeful that we're sort of raising a kinder generation.
I certainly think so. Well, let me say it this way: I think we are raising generations that will not buy into the BS as much as other generations because they can't. It's not as easy to restrict information. Information is so readily available. It's a lot easier for people to be free thinking. It's also a lot easier for them to share their thoughts. And it's also easier for them to see that the world is connected, that they realize that something they do can affect somebody in, say, Germany or, the Philippines or wherever else, So that's something that I think helps a lot of that go forward because what happened before is, say, I'm from a small town in the Midwest, right? If the internet didn't come up and I didn't move out of there, I only know like the couple 100,000, whatever people it is that live around me, and that's all I care about. And so then when I hear about something in the news about them wanting to change some law because people out in California are doing this or people in Florida or whatever, then I suddenly don't care as much, right? Because I don't have that sense of it. But so I think with the ubiquitous nature of the internet, we should hopefully realize that we're part of the larger community instead of just a community that shares our zip code.
No, absolutely. I think the awareness is what's so important, right? So, like to be self aware and then to be aware of others. So, that's going to be tremendous to sort of have that global mindset and to be thinking outside of your own sort of bubble.
So are we getting your children into politics? We're gonna go ahead and start their campaign right now. I'd love to be the
I don't
campaign
think,
manager. Let's do it.
yeah, I don't think, maybe Surrey. I could see my daughter. Um, I think that Thomas will probably, I mean, he's just obsessed with like science and technology and innovation.
I have no idea
So,
where he gets that from.
no idea. It's like the weirdest thing. It's like, where did this kid come from? So yeah, I don't know. I think that he, honestly, I think he would have a difficult time being a politician. I think that there's many politicians who are well intentioned, and I think the way that the system is, they sort of sometimes can't be true to themselves, and that's got to be a very difficult life too. So I think a lot of people don't like politicians because maybe they're married or marionettes for sort of other people, or lobbyists play a role. So yeah, I don't know that I would see him doing that. I don't know that he could.
Yeah,
I
and
don't think he'd be successful at that.
I'd
It
vote
takes a
for him.
certain personality.
I'd vote for him just because he seems to be a very earnest person. You know what I mean? And again,
Yeah,
he's very young, so it's hard to tell what he's going to develop into. But I'm guessing that that's going to remain true. But I think something you touched on there that is for me at the heart of one of the philosophies I try to live by is that it's not politicians, it's not Kim Kardashian, it's not the businessman, it's the systems that support their behavior being successful, and that's why we get where we're going. So if you don't want that news station to continue existing, stop watching them. Don't comment on their
right.
stuff. Stop giving them the feedback that gets them money. If same thing for politicians, vote them out. If you don't like them, vote them out. It's really that simple. And one of the things that we've seen, so and I don't. This isn't meant to be political. This is behavioral. All right. So anybody who's listening, this isn't a political statement. What President Trump brought into effect a little over 4 years ago now is a change in the way that political commentary happens, in both the way that he did it and the way that people talked about him. So we cannot sit there and attribute all of that behavior to him because everyone else played into it and it was successful. So what that says is about the structure that allowed that to all happen and be successful. That's just a big example of it. I use a Kim Kardashian example a lot one of the other times I talk, but it's all true. The system supports their behavior, so you don't dislike that person. You dislike that the system allows that to happen and be successful.
Yeah, I think sometimes that's a difficult thing for people to identify where the root of the problem is, right? So it's
Mhm,
easy to sort of identify what you see to be the representation of that problem, but it exists in context. So, what is the system? What is the policy? Um, what is the reasoning? And again, it's like thinking about it. Like for us right now, for example, our New York City public schools are closed. They were closed today and they'll be closed tomorrow, and it's until further notice. And people are really upset because why are the bars open? Why are the restaurants open? The positive test rate is very low. But at the root of the issue is that the mayor had negotiated with our, UFT, our United sort of Federation of Teachers, the union of the teachers, this agreement that for New York City, which is a really large city, includes 5 boroughs, that if that overall sort of average over 7 days is more than 3% or higher, that the schools would close. And so that did happen. And while there's areas of the city, like in Manhattan, for example, that aren't really being affected right now, people feel it's really unfair that the schools are closed. But again, the root of the problem is not bars being open and gyms being open. That has
mhm.
nothing to do with the fact that there was this agreement for this criteria for schools to close if the rate got that high.
Absolutely. And I think what you're touching on there is, again, one of the key elements that I like to try to dig into when you're talking about those things is the root problem. But even beyond that, what also that sounds like to me is somebody who's using, hey, let's not wait for it to get bad before we make a decision. You know what I mean? Let's do it
Yeah,
before that.
yeah. I think, so I think at the time when the decision was made, the teachers, understandably, were very concerned to be in the classroom. New York City, of all places, I mean, I think the whole country was sort of waiting to see what happens to the New York City Department of Education. It's the largest school district, has 1.1 million students.
Yes.
So everyone else was sort of looking to this one school district for guidance, and the teachers were like, "Shoot, this was like ground zero in March, April, May." And we didn't sign up to be frontline workers. Like we didn't. They
Mhm.
didn't. They were. I mean, we want to just teach children and do it safely, and we have our own families. So I understood that they needed to come up with some metric that made them feel comfortable. I don't think it was well detailed in that it should maybe be more specifically to the borough or to the zip codes involved,
Mhm.
and not sort of a global number for the entire city, which again is a very big city. So for us, for our zip code, that percentage is very low. It's only hovering right above 1%. So that's not even close to the 3%. So I think a lot of
Mhm.
people are feeling like there's a disconnect there.
No, absolutely. And I think the other thing that schools, particularly being shut down, has shown to me is how reliant on the school system so many people are. And I don't mean that just in a here take our children for a few hours thing, but you're talking about school lunches, you're talking about all these other things that go
Yes.
in with that, the after school programs, all this type of stuff that they, because parents work. And so
Right.
I think you're seeing again a shift in how we evaluate that structure, how we evaluate the school system, and how we evaluate everything we need to do. Because if shutting down a school for an extended period of time can disrupt your life that way, then what does that say about the way we have our life structured? It shouldn't be so easy to disrupt our lives. And again, I'm not saying I have a solution for it by any means. Don't
Yeah.
point anything there. But I just think it's very interesting when, well, I shouldn't say interesting. It's kind of sad when now that school's being closed as a safety precaution means that a kid is struggling to eat.
Absolutely. No, and that was a large reason. I mean, I think the other thing is for us, like our New York City Mayor de Blasio was very reluctant to close schools in March. I mean, just waited until really the last moment. One of his reasons was because there's a lot of children who depend on, breakfast and lunch at school. So it was also finding a way to make families who were sort of food insecure um, getting access to the food. So even today, one of our parent coordinators, who's an administrator at the school, sent out an email saying, "Listen, you can come to the school building. The school building is closed for students, but there's breakfast and lunch kits sort of for pickup, so that people have access to that."
And that's great that they're able to find those workarounds. And I hope that they are equally effective to the school lunch programs and everything. So I honestly haven't kept up with a lot of the statistics and all that. I just remember seeing that. I'm like, man, that's not even something I would have considered, even though I was one of those kids getting free school lunches. I never even
Yeah.
thought about what that did to my mom when we had snow days or things like that. Now she has to provide an extra day of food and stuff, you know?
No, it can be a tremendous source of stress, right? And the other thing is, in New York City schools, breakfast and lunch is free for all kids.
Hmm.
So there's also this element of access to the food. So that became something important, and that actually happened from the time my son's now in fourth grade. When he was in kindergarten and in first grade, there was like a student account, and there was, if you qualified for breakfast and lunch, then it was either subsidized or free. But now to know that it's universally free for all kids, no questions asked. So there's so many great things about our public school system. And like you said, I think this has really identified some of the issues and how dependent so many families have been on it. And I
Hmm.
think it gives us all brand new or sort of revitalized, let's say not brand new, because I've always appreciated our teachers, but I think the role of the teacher in the student's education and as a role model for behavior, I mean, so much of it. I mean, the teachers to me are like gold. So I will bend over backwards for all of our teachers in our school because it takes a very special person to become a teacher.
It definitely does because, oh my God, would you talk to me about the jobs that I'd hate to do the most? Teacher is at the top of the list. Oh man, I could, and that again, this is funny. I used to coach kids in martial arts, and that was only for like an hour, like a couple times a week or something like that. I'm like, oh, I could not do this 8 hours a day, and then try to teach them
Exhausting.
numbers. How are you a
Forget
math
it.
teacher to 5-year-olds? I Man, those people deserve all the medals of honor and all that type of stuff. That's
No, listen,
nuts.
I think that was one thing from the spring that I think every parent was like, as soon as these schools open up, I'm going to just sign my next paycheck to the teacher. Like, there's going to be no problem raising money for like the holiday gift or the end of year gift because this teacher, man, deserves everything because this is the hardest job ever is to teach kids. And I mean, I see the difference. I can be as animated and I can come up with what I think is a great way to teach my daughter something.
Mhm.
It does not matter. She goes to school and the teacher says blank, and that is the like law of the land. Like that's it. Like
Mhm.
it's like held to the like highest degree of like mom says it. Yeah, I don't know, mom. I'm not sure that you're doing that right. So, you know,
I think in March was my ultimate pettiness for all the people who ever asked me, well, why don't you want to have kids? And then they got locked into houses with their kids. I'm like, enjoy,
there
enjoy
you go.
this moment.
Yeah. There you go.
Oh,
Um, yeah. I mean, it was very hard, but for me, I also tell people that the kids sort of carried me through. I mean, there were
mhm,
definitely very long, sort of dark nights where I was like, oh my gosh, this is like never ending. Like, what is going on? and just trying to understand the characteristics of the virus and how it evolves, why some people who are very young were getting very sick. So the kids really were what kind of kept me like, okay, like I've got to get up, I've got to get them doing their work, and I've got to just keep it sort of as uplifting as possible. Um, so for me, I was like, I don't know, I would have maybe had a harder time if I didn't have my children. Now we did make a list of all the things we were thankful for. So we were thankful that we didn't have toddlers, because I think it
Mhm.
would have been a hard amount of days to have someone inside. So there was lots of things that we were like, gosh, we're happy this, we're happy that. So I think that shift to just looking for anything that you could be grateful for is really big.
So it sounds like you guys were practicing gratitude.
Yeah. I mean, because I think when you're sort of everything kind of gets taken from you, right? Like, and
Mhm.
again, um, we're healthy and everything is we're very lucky. But I think when you don't have the activities and you don't have the extracurriculars and sort of all the bells and whistles of what makes life in New York City so wonderful and enriching for us, you sort of pare that all down, and then
Mhm.
you're like, what are we left with? And so, so I think we discovered something that we wouldn't have under any other circumstance. There's no other way that we would have like found out that like, okay, we can make this happen in a small space. And we found ways to keep each other entertained and happy and healthy. And um, I think before, every time there was a holiday weekend, I was quick to make plans for us to go
Mhm.
away, go do something. And so it was just nice to do nothing.
Absolutely. And I think that was one of the things that I found time for this year as well, to try to keep myself a little bit balanced, was time to do nothing, which is something I've kind of slacked off on the past few weeks, or few weeks, few months, but I need to get back into it. And I was meditating, and I found time, because for me, meditation is not spiritual. It's literally time for me to shut up and do nothing, which is something I never do. And so you do the meditation, other people do gratitude. I knew people, and I still know people who do coloring. They color, they have a coloring
Yes.
book and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Whatever
Yeah.
that thing is for you, I think I celebrate and support more people trying to go and do those things for themselves, because we're learning more and more about stress and mental health and all these things all the time. But I think it's very important, especially in these stressful times, to try to find that and then carry that forward. You always need to better yourself that way, by showing yourself that it is okay to just be still, or to show gratitude for the things you have without feeling like you're being conceited or cocky or whatever.
Yeah, and I think one of the earliest articles I saw in the shutdown was an article talking against our sort of like hustle culture,
Hmm.
productivity culture. Because I think initially there was this list of like, learn a new language, like, do this, do that, like, use this as an opportunity to acquire a new skill that will be successful for work. And I think to denounce that and say, hey, like, we don't have to be productive all the time, you can do nothing right now. Like, do
Hmm.
nothing and sort of relish in that nothing, because that calm and that peace, I think, is going to be far more reach. The reach of it is so much better for your overall health.
Absolutely, and that's one of the things that I think has been lost in American culture, because if you look at countries like, well, it's not a great example because of how the pandemic hit it, but still, but like Italy, with a more relaxed culture approach towards work, they cook fresh foods like every night and stuff like that. You look at all these different ways to live around the world, and America has this kind of constant grind, and we burn ourselves
Go.
out, and
Yeah.
we're not necessarily as happy, especially for as rich of a land as we have, as many things as we can
Yeah.
do. So you got some, for perfect example, medical professionals, some doctors and surgeons and things like that. When they first get into the field, especially, they're working like 16-hour days and all that stuff, whatever, and so they're making good money, but they don't get to see any of it.
Yeah, no, and they're probably still paying off their loans, which is
Right.
another topic that's like a great topic. But no, absolutely. I think, even if you look at the number of like weeks of vacation, right? So people often talk about like
Mm.
European number, like 6 weeks is sort of like the standard. And here in the US, like you get a job and you're like, okay, you're gonna have 2 weeks of vacation, two like little weeks, 50 weeks you're working. So, yeah, I think that I'm hoping that one of the other sort of silver linings is that corporations can sort of reevaluate like work life balance. I think hopefully people will see that the happier the person, the more productive they could be, and that there's a lot you
Hmm.
can get done in a shorter amount of time. Um, it's this sort of like high achieving, always working. It's also not good. It's part of a medicine culture. It's sort of
Hmm.
the stories of giants, like, "Oh, I did 30 hours of call," and I'm supposed to be proud of that, and I survived, and then I like drove home, but I wasn't even sure like what exit to take. I mean, these are stories that I've heard,
Hmm.
and some of it I've sort of lived through. So it's just sort of like, how tough can you be? And that's not human. Like, that shouldn't be happening.
And what's crazy is one of the jobs, or I don't know if you would say industries or however you want to describe it, but out there that is considered like some of the toughest, understand that. And I'm talking about the military. The military gives everyone 30 days a year of leave you can take. And then whenever you deploy, no matter if you saw combat or not, you get a free, I think, 2 weeks off when you get back as well. So they understand the value in recuperation because of what they put their people through and everything like that. And so we need to have a better culture here in the United States about, it's not about how long you work, it's about how effective you are in that work.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I can play
Yeah.
basketball for 2 years straight and never be as good as LeBron doing it for 5 minutes. So it's not
Right.
about it, it's what you're getting out of that time. And so if I'm able to rest and relax and everything like you just said, I'm going to be much better, especially if we're talking about doctors. I don't want my doctor coming in on 2 hours of sleep because he pulled 30 hours, you know?
Yeah. No, or you don't really want the doctor seeing you who hasn't had time to stop for water or to eat lunch. Like, that's terrible. So, I think they're better. I think it's better than it was in the past, but there's a lot of issues, to be honest, in sort of the culture of medicine and the practice of medicine. So, the culture of training to become a doctor, and then once you actually are a doctor, I think there's a lot that sort of needs work.
There's a comparison I've been making a lot lately, and I want to talk to you about it because as a medical professional, you could either confirm or deny what the comparison I'm making. But are some doctors, particularly I would say probably residents, I guess, basically akin to public defenders in that they are assigned such a large workload, patient load, I guess, in your field, that they don't have the time to really dig down deep into the intricacies of each patient the same way they would if they had maybe more of a private practice where the people came in, a little bit less.
There's a lot of layers there when you're sort of on house staff when you are a resident.
Mhm.
So typically, you're still overseen by an attending. So if there's a resident, then there's commonly also an intern and then a medical student. So you've got all these layers to ensure that it's like a thorough sort of evaluation. So I don't know the numbers, and I don't think that there's any increase of like medical negligence among
Mhm.
house staff as opposed to those out sort of in community practice, even for the same level of like, because it wouldn't be the same level of training, but within a certain range of years of training. Um,
So to be
so there's a
clear,
lot,
and I
so a
may have
lot of
made the
layers.
point, I may have made the point the improper way. I was more so talking about in certain hospitals, public centers, wherever they are, uh, that a lot the doctors have such a high patient load that they don't have but a couple minutes in between patients and those type of things. I shouldn't have said
Yeah.
resident. I knew I
Yes.
swung on that and I shouldn't
Yes.
have.
Yes. No, no, no. No, it's okay. No, you're right. I think there are certain sort of places where you see patients like that are sort of more of like a corporate setting. So
Mhm.
I think a lot of medicine has become more corporate, and so then it's essentially administrators who have done the math to figure out like, okay, you need to see X number of patients so that it becomes profitable for the center, so that we cover our overhead and then can cover sort of all of our salaries, and then you do the math so then the patients can be sort of one every 10 minutes or something like that.
Mhm.
And perhaps in a private practice that is not under some type of like corporate structure, or doesn't have any sort of like business aspect to it, is truly just going to be the practice of medicine. The physician may have more sort of leeway in how much time they spend with each patient, whether or not it makes sense. Like sometimes it may not, because you're only going
Right.
to get you know paid for the whole sort of visit, not necessarily by minute. So, yes, the volume can be different.
And so when what it kind of makes me think of is I just talked to one of my friends, and I'm gonna mess this up, so feel free to correct me where because I always say this wrong. But she has endometriosis. Is that right?
Yes,
Did I
you
get
said
it?
it right.
Awesome.
Yeah.
I always want to say endometriosis, and I'm like, there's no
No,
eo.
no, no.
Stop
Go
doing
with the
that.
first way.
Yeah,
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 yeah.
yeah. So she has it, and one of the obviously the issues with that, and there's a lot because it's a relatively rare or understudied, I guess,
Understudied.
disease.
Yeah.
Yeah. So is that she wasn't able to get the appropriate diagnosis sometimes because, and this is a lot of VA doctors and stuff like that, and there's nothing wrong with VA doctors. I think you've worked with the VA too, right?
I am on VA faculty. Yeah.
Yeah, you go. Yeah. So
Yeah.
nothing against VA doctors, but I do see a lot of VA doctors are overwhelmed with their staff load and stuff like that, especially here in Florida where the retiree population is just insane. Um, but that she wouldn't get the full analysis. One, because obviously, again, it's there's a lot of things you're talking about there. You're talking about women and how they're viewed by their practicing by their physicians and everything, but also just that they were trying to speed the process up. Like you said, they had so many patients they had to see and they had to do these things or whatever. So they were trying to go through there relatively quickly. And she was not fighting literally, but she was just fighting through the process for so many years to try to get the appropriate diagnosis. And again, when you're already dealing with a rare disease and then you're dealing with the other side of it where they're getting turned over so quickly, I think that's just, I don't blame the medical professionals. I blame, again, the system that makes that necessary for it to
Yeah.
keep
No, it's
going.
a system issue. I think that you're right in the sense that so first of all, endometriosis, women who suffer with endometriosis suffer from a lot of sort of quality of life issues and have a high sort of morbidity. There's a lot of pain involved. And so I think it's a difficult condition to diagnose and even more difficult to treat. So it's very hard to get, as with many conditions that involve pain, hard to get patients comfortable. And
Mhm.
so I feel for her and really anyone who suffers with any type of pain because I think that requires a lot of time, and then it requires sometimes a lot of visits, right, to get the person comfortable. Um, People get upset with the physician, and one of the biggest issues we're having is physician burnout because the
Mhm.
physician actually doesn't want to see patients like this. You know what I mean? Like they really want to establish relationships with patients. They want to have an understanding of who they are as a person, not just as a patient, and they want to feel good about the care that they give. So it makes physicians feel awful to see people so quickly and feel like they're not doing a good job. Like they want to do a good job. So the system is set up in a way that, you know, shouldn't be, right? So it's sort
Mhm.
of corporatization of medicine and sort of the added technology with like electronic medical records, accessibility to your results, contacting your physician. There just aren't enough hours in the day. This is, I think, not a sustainable way for medicine to be. I think when people come in and they want to see medicine as a business and make it more profitable, something has to give. And I think often it's going to be the compromise of how the physician is practicing and then how the care that the patient may be receiving. I mean, so that has got to change in our lifetime because there's just too many physicians experiencing burnout.
I absolutely agree. I think that we need to. One of the things that I always go back to for mostly capitalistic endeavors, but it really anything, is what behavior are you incentivizing? What the system you have in place? How are you incentivizing the behavior, and is that the behavior you want to incentivize? And I think a lot of systems don't look at that. We want to do what feels right to us. We want to have the knee jerk reaction. So one of the things a way I always think about it is when the old adage of like sending a daughter off to a Catholic school so she doesn't, become promiscuous or become like too rebellious or whatever. And a lot of those girls do because you're not incentivizing the right behavior. Instead of teaching them how to like analyze their situations and just be who they're going to be as a person, you want to control them, you want to lock them down and stuff like that. And you're not incentivizing the right behavior. It's counterintuitive, but you're not doing it the right way. Just like
Yeah.
they've talked about before, decriminalizing a lot of drugs and doing it as a public health issue instead of a criminal issue also lowers the drug rates and lowers the overdoses and lowers all these things. But so who are you incentivizing by the process you're putting into place? And what you've said is exactly true. It's another capitalistic endeavor that incentivizes profit over actually getting good medical care.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's particularly sad because I don't see myself as like too far into my career. 10 years out, graduated from medical school. And in the past few years, so not recently, so within the first year, 5 years of practice, and I was MD PhD, so I had friends who were obviously practicing longer because they had a shorter course of schooling. Um, I already had friends who wanted to leave medicine. And so it's a
Mhm.
lot of hours and a lot of years to put in dedication, um, and and then to think like you're going to leave medicine, and I'm very unhappy with the choice that they had made, and it wasn't what they thought it was going to be like caring for other people. Like they want to
Mhm.
care for other people, and they're like, it's not set up for me to do that. And then on top of the fact that I don't feel good because I'm not providing the care that I think people need, I'm also sort of getting the repercussion of administrators saying, I'm not going fast enough, patients
Mhm.
being upset because they're not getting better or the attention that they want from me. And so you just feel like you're failing on all fronts. So why not just like dip out and be like, you know what, my bad. I'll just pay off these loans and then I'll go find something else to do. So,
Yeah.
I mean, that's for me to know few people who've left medicine is kind of crazy.
Yeah. And I don't blame him. I value the people who decide to get into medicine, but I think they're all nuts. I think you personally are nuts because it's all the hard work you had to do. Like you could have done way less work and made way more money for you know what I mean. So, but
It
I
was
get, but
never
we need
about
people like you.
money.
No, I know,
Yeah.
I know, I know.
It was never really about money, because it totally does not make sense. I mean, if you're doing it for money, to be completely honest, it does not make sense. Because you're giving up your younger sort of productive like years. You could do another job,
Mhm.
um, and also the cost of schooling is so tremendously high, and then interest rates, and the fact that that interest is capitalized, so it's probably a terrible financial decision to make, especially if you're funding it yourself. um, but I've never wanted to become that pessimistic person. If very young people come and talk to me about getting into medical school or going into medicine,
Mhm.
I mean, listen, if you have that inside of you, um, you do it and then you figure it out, right? So yes, you might be paying off loans. You might pay them off right before your kid goes to college, but like you're living your dream, so
Yeah.
it's good. Um,
And I think it's one of those professions like you talked about earlier, like teachers. You have to do it because you love it. It can't be the check that gets you there, or you're not going to succeed. You're going to burn out. You're not going to make it.
yeah, you're not going to make it, and I think people can sense it. I think
Mhm.
that yes, there are some specialties where they're more lucrative and they have more sort of like elective procedures. But I think, we've all been to doctors and we can sense like those who you're like, I feel a connection to this person. I know that they care about my health and I know that they want what is best for me. And there's like no conflict of any interest there. So, yeah, I think that it's all about intentions, right? So it's about finding
Mhm.
a purpose and then what your intention is and being true to that intention.
Absolutely. And one of the things I saw you do earlier this year that, again, to me spoke to how you are viewing your role in the medical field and your role in just that is that presentation that you gave on I think it was called Racist Skin Deep or something like that.
Yes.
Yeah, and so
Yes.
it's those type of things where you could see that that's you didn't make any money for that. At least I don't think you did, but maybe you did. I don't know. I'm not asking
No.
you to say, but
No. No.
it's those type of things you could see that where you're like those are the kind of attitudes and the behaviors we need in the medical profession is people who have that kind of care. It's so that's another question I had is the Hippocratic Oath, is that still a thing or did that go away? I've heard that it went away.
It went away because we adopted sort of a newer, more inclusive statement.
Mhm.
Um, and but it's just still along the same lines. I think upheld the same sort of ideals as far as like the oath that we take to take care of people, to not inflict any harm,
Mhm.
to do for the greater good, and to really sort of continue to be lifelong learners. So I think the system can sort of burn people out, and I think that's what that oath is. It's just constantly there to remind you like why you went into this. So that's what I often try to share with like the residents is that you can become a little bit disgruntled. You can sort of feel like you're really distanced from that first essay you wrote. Like, please, accept me into medical school. I want to help everyone. And you've got to sort of reconnect and recenter yourself back to that. Because if you sort of wake up every day with, like, I'm going to be the bright spot in someone's day to day, I think, people feel that and it feels good. So you're going to feel good. The person's going to feel good. And that's in itself a type of medicine, right? So those like micro connections that we make and the way that we make others feel. And even if I don't have the answers, just so that I can make someone feel like I'm hearing you, I feel for you, and I'm on your team and I'm your advocate to find the right answer for you.
Mhm. So can you tell me the core theme of the racist skin deep presentation you did earlier?
Yeah, the racist skin deep. I think so. I have a very sort of interesting and diverse background myself, but my undergraduate degree was in anthropology. I've always had an interest in just skin color, um, race as not only a social construct, but then more importantly, um, race and racism in public health and in medicine. So when we study groups and we study populations, we want to put people into categories because that's sort of how we study people, right? Or study populations. And so that's something that's always been of interest to me from a very young age is sort of these categories of like white, Caucasian, Black, African American, Hispanic or Latino or Latina, Asian, Pacific Islander, like what actually determines how people get put into these categories? Is that how they identify? Is that something that is assigned to them? And then how true are they to represent how people are throughout the system?
Mm.
So, meaning like access to different health services, and then how this plays a role in disparities that we see, ethnic and racial disparities in health. So, I, as a dermatologist, add to that I understand what actually makes the skin the color that you see in a certain person. So I did this presentation. I've done it multiple times, but this one felt really good because it was for the NYU School of Medicine, where I'm on faculty, and it felt good because I can actually share with people, not only from a social science perspective that race is socially constructed, but what do you actually see under the microscope? There is no, real biological difference to make these categories, but we can't just get rid of the categories because racism is very much pervasive through the way that we care for people and the way that outcomes are sort of in medicine. So it seemed like a great time. It was part of a series, a diversity series, and I had so many really great emails afterwards and new discussions, and it just got people sort of thinking. Um, and it's something that can feel really routine that you've got these, you're going to do a survey, you're going to do a study, and then you ask participants or you assign to participants, hey, like, what category do you fit into? And so, sort of the implications of like, what do you do with this information? Or even this was a US Census year, right? So, what do we do with that US Census data? And what does that mean for our different communities and how they get funded? So, we have to understand these categories and these variables if we really want to make differences. So, I think where we're at in medicine, we recognize the difference, but it's like, what do we do about it now?
And see, I think that those kind of things are fascinating. And just from my own uh, personal experience with them, I used to object so much to being classified in a census or in a governmental way as black that I used to fill out those things and I'd put white on there a lot of the time.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And which again is accurate. It is as accurate as black is, but it's just interesting to me because I was so bitter about the fact that they were trying to classify that, and I was worried about what it said about black people and all this different type of stuff. But realistically, now knowing more and knowing yourself and knowing your sister and everything, and where that information actually gets used, it's made me much more want to do that. And I got double hit this year, by the way. I got the census, and then I also the Department of Labor picked our apartment for classifying. So I've been doing these type of surveys and everything like that for about a year now going on.
Yeah.
So, but I think that knowing more about that process helps me understand how it flows into it. And for people like you, that information is super important because, like you said, you're acknowledging that there are biases and those type of things in medicine. So it's not specifically that, as you said, that the skin's different, but it's the way that we treat the people in that skin that is different and
Yep.
does affect the way that the medical care is provided.
Yeah, like the implicit bias where, how a patient may be approached, you may not even be aware. Again, back to like awareness, right? So there's so many layers that you have to understand. For me personally, um, I was applying to, I think like a selective, like middle school or something, and I had to pick the race category. And I honestly, I was like, I don't know, I like don't know what category I'm in. My parents were both born in Iran, and when I looked at this like actual application, it on the back side it had countries listed, and so white, or really the group that we sometimes say Caucasian, didn't just include Europe, but it also included Northern Africa and Middle East, and it had listed there the country Iran. And I just thought, I guess I'm white. Like I was just like, okay, like the country that both my parents are from is listed under white, and so I was confused by it because I was like, well, Iran is under white, even though by geographic sort of, if you look at a globe, it's in the continent of Asia, but it wasn't under Asian. So I just, it's just got into my mind of like, how are these categories and what do they mean? And then interestingly, that these categories haven't changed for hundreds of years. So there needs to be an awareness, because I definitely think that there has to be change. But however we can sort of garner information so that we make the care that we provide as equal, and that we can not only sort of address issues and disparities, but also inequities that we sort of have, and where different groups and communities are starting from.
If anyone needs to know that race is a social construct, all they need to know is that at one time Irish people weren't considered white. The whitest people on the freaking planet, and I can say that because my white side's Irish, so I'm not shooting, I'm not punching
Yeah,
down or punching up or whatever.
yeah,
The whitest people on the planet basically were not considered white because it's a construct. It's because it's about power. It's about all these other things going on and stuff. And so I think this could be one of the death knells of the nature versus nurture argument, because if we accept that there is not a difference in the race, then we have to accept that it's nurture, or rather how we're socialized and everything, that forms how we view the culture of the different races that we have. Because it's
yeah.
not, like you
No,
said, it's just skin deep.
it's just skin deep. And the thing is, I mean, first of all, I think sort of in the 15th century, when we started to have explorers and people who understood geography, and people at that point were sort of having multiple interests, right? So they were physicians or anthropologists, and they were traveling, and they started to see people who looked different than them, and then they were like, oh my gosh, similar to like a child who may sort of sort, was
Hmm.
trying to think of like, how am I going to put these groups into categories? What do these differences mean? And so there's obviously very limited understanding. And not everyone, but there was a group that started to assign superiority or inferiority based on the difference that was phenotypically seen. So seen with the eyes, like what you could actually see is someone looking different, or other than you.
Hmm.
And so it's got its roots in science, and it's got its roots sort of in medicine, and I think that's important for a lot of medical professionals to know. And then when I show those slides of what you actually see under the microscope, that you need a very special microscope, an electron microscope that's really hard to come by in order to actually see the difference between what we see as big differences in skin color, or
Hmm.
like on this super sub microscopic level, is sort of mind blowing for a lot of people. Even though they know that there's a social construct, they're like, well, genetically, the code that is written must be different because you look like this and I look like this. And for me to say, okay, at this level of the skin with this ultra super fancy microscope that nobody has, is the only way that we can ultra structurally see this difference. I think for some is, like they say the word social construct, but I don't think they really understand. And I'm showing them, look, I'm showing you the actual slides from skin biopsies. And like, you're not gonna be able to tell the difference. Like I could put two red cups and be like, which one, do you think is like this patient, which one? And it's gonna be like that game. So So I think that that's important for people to know when they care for all different kinds of people. It would be the same way if we were to categorize on like hair color.
Well, I wouldn't get to really compete in that one, I
You
don't
wouldn't
think
be in,
so.
yeah, there would be no category for you.
I'm cool. I'm
Yeah.
uncategorized. I like that. Oh man. So
Yeah.
I've got this stupid thing that I've wanted to ask you this entire time, and you don't have to
Tell
tell me
me.
the product, but have you ever been one of the 3 out of 5 dermatologists that recommend a lotion or something?
Yes, I have.
Ah, that is incredible.
Yes. You can Google it. I think I look terrible in the video. Um, Aquaphor. Aquaphor is a popular product. They came out with a way to create, it's actually very cool. So if you've ever used Aquaphor, it's an ointment. It's typically in a tub and you put your hand into it and can kind of get all over the place. So they figured out a way to put it in aerosolized spray. And so I did do a pop sugar video on this new product launch for Aquaphor. And I was like the dermatologist.
That is absolutely incredible. If I can find it, I'm linking it when I post this episode for sure
Yeah,
because
it's
that's awesome.
crazy. I think my hair is like this short and I had my makeup done. And then when you see the video and then you're like, oh, it's sort of like when you hear your own voice, you're like, that's what I sound like. Oh, God. So,
I've had to get over that because I've been editing hours of me talking, so it's kind of gotten away from me. I don't hate my voice as much as I used to. I still don't like it, but I don't hate it as much as I used to.
yeah. So I'm probably going to just let you edit this. I probably won't listen to myself later.
Well, I think that'd be a shame. Hopefully, everybody else does because your voice isn't terrible, first of all. So let's start there.
Thank
But
you.
also, just I think the knowledge that you're sharing is very important, and it was one of the reasons that I wanted to talk to you about this stuff, anyways, because
Thanks,
I respect
Brandon.
the work that you've done to learn that. Because no matter what people think, it's not intrinsic. You had to go to school, you had to study, and thank God you did because now the conspiracy is finally complete and people are wearing masks. So, what's phase two of your evil world plan to make people wear masks and take away their freedoms?
Yeah. I have to like sort of ploy for the next one. I'm not sure. I'm thinking about it. Back to
Well,
the drawing board.
that's what I wanna know. I wanna know the full theory for where that whole thing goes. So just keep me on the inside. I know you can't say it
Okay.
here for everybody else to hear, but just make sure that you
Yeah.
take care of me
Yeah.
so I know where not to get my arms cut off or whatever else is next. I don't know. So, but anyways, thank you so much. I really appreciate you coming on here and sharing this time with me. I don't think we've ever sat down and talked for, as long as we have right now. And again, that was one of the main reasons I did this. So I want to say I support people in your field. I support what you're doing. I support people who are doing all the stuff that are very important out there. No matter what misinformation is being spread, you're necessary. And I also support you unfriending people on Facebook because you deal with enough bullshit throughout your day. You don't have to deal with it the entire day.
Thank you so much. I like that nice endorsement at the end. I was feeling bad for a moment about unfriending, but now I don't.
No, don't. My name is Brandon, and I support this message. But all right, well, thank you very much. I'm gonna go ahead and turn this off, but thank you. It's been great.
Thanks, Brandon.
Thanks for checking out Starting Nowhere. If you haven't already, make sure you check us out on YouTube, Spotify, iTunes, or wherever you get your podcasts.